when trees fall down after a short period of time, about 18 months, they become very dry. They become really like a matchstick. They just explode. They can explode. Also, leaves. When you have years of leaves, dried leaves on the ground, it just sets it up. It's really a fuel for a fire. So they have to do something about it. They also have to do cuts. I mean, people don't like to do cuts, but they have to do cuts in between.
President Trump in California today criticizing the way the state handling its forests and, in effect, blaming the state for the severity of the wildfires. And I should say, he said similar things about the state of Oregon. Now, the scope of the devastation is almost unfathomable on the West Coast. More than 5 million acres have burned, entire towns consumed by flames. At least 26 people have died. And in Oregon, 10% of the state's population facing possible evacuation from their homes. California is already having its worst fire season on record, and we have not remotely hit the peak. Now, the scientific consensus is pointing the finger at climate change, driving the increase in fire activity and also the severity of those fires. And again, don't take my word for it. Take a listen to the California Governor Gavin Newsom.
The debate is over around climate change. Just come to the state of California. Observe it with your own eyes. It's not an intellectual debate. It's not even debatable.
And Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley also took exception when it came to the president's reasonings for what those states were facing.
The president has said it's all about raking the forests. It's just a big and devastating lie. We have the Cascade snowpacks have gotten smaller, our forests have gotten drier, our ocean has gotten warmer and more acidic, and this has been happening steadily over the last several decades.
This all coming as the president continues to say that climate change is, in fact, not a crisis. He guts environmental regulations by the dozens. He's also going on record as bragging about pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords, an agreement signed by nearly every other nation on Earth, including the likes of war-torn countries like even Syria.
You know, I took you out of that crazy Paris Climate Accord because it was a total disaster. No. It was a way of hurting the United States. I tell you, it was actually, I thought it would be devastating. I got one day of bad press. After that, everybody forgot about it. It wasn't that bad.
Well, today, the president's opponent, Joe Biden, took direct aim at the president's record when it comes to the environment.
How many suburbs will be burned in wildfires? How many suburban neighborhoods will have been flooded out? How many suburbs will have been blown away in superstorms? If you give a climate arsonist 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised if we have more America ablaze?
All right, well, let's leave the backdrop of the politics and just get into what's going on the ground and where we could be looking at for the foreseeable future in California. My next guest just co-wrote a piece in the Times describing the role of climate change in the fires of California. San Francisco Bureau Chief Thomas Fuller joins us, and he's joining us out of Oroville in California, where you can see the smog there in the backdrop. And Thomas, you had a fascinating piece, and there's a few points in there I wanted, if you could, to expand on. You spoke to Roy Wright, who grew up near one of the fire-torn areas, but he also directed resilience programs at FEMA until 2018. He said, and I'm quoting here, it's apocalyptic. You're toppling dominoes in ways that Americans haven't imagined. What did he mean by dominoes, obviously speaking in the plural, about simultaneous environmental catastrophes?
Well, you know, we've had fires every year in California for the last 4 years, but we've never had so many mega fires at once. Right now we have 6 of the largest fires in California history happening within a few dozen miles of each other. So this is, the firefighters are stretched absolutely to capacity. There have been thousands of structures destroyed, and even by the standards of the last few years, which have been horrific, this is certainly the worst year California's seen.
For folks watching us outside of California, the fact that it's September 14th and is as bad as it already is right now, you guys aren't remotely out of fire season, right?
That's right. Yeah. So, you know, the California climate is very much a desert climate for most of the year. and then the rain comes in the winter months. And so it's at the end of that dry season when you have the traditional fire season. But traditional fire season has really been blown up because now we have fires breaking out almost all year long. And the very high winds that cause some of the worst fires are yet to come. So absolutely, we're not out of the woods.
You laid out in your piece, it's not just, and it's bad enough, the all-consuming fires here that are razing entire towns, but what comes along, and you can see a little bit behind you, the air quality, how it's impacting water, the drinkability of water. Talk about all the impacts that are going into, including, you know, I think you described one family where they had the windows up in the middle of an inferno and they felt like they were cooking to death because if they put the windows down, they'd choke on the smoke. This is begetting one other problem, begetting a bigger problem. It just seems to be going from bad to worse.
Yeah, absolutely. That, you know, one thing that was striking to me in reporting that piece was I hadn't really realized the scale of the crisis that is to come. The water quality, the threats to our water systems is something that I hadn't thought about too much. That's because some of the water systems are damaged by the heat, the intense heat of these fires, and so dangerous chemicals, toxic chemicals, leach into the water system in the affected areas for months after the fires. That's something that was discovered just a few years ago from a California wildfire. There's obviously also the threat of water being contaminated by all of the toxic chemicals that burn in homes, and you have runoff going into reservoirs. But it goes well beyond that in California. I mean, we've had blackouts last summer and this year because the utility cuts the power just to try and prevent its equipment from sparking fire. So it goes to the power systems, it goes to the water systems, it goes to the health system because the air is so unhealthy.
And I know you talked to some people who are right in the area where they're waiting for the next big one. I'm talking about an earthquake right now. You mentioned the power outages that are rolling. And people that could deal with one problem at a time, it was bad enough. But for some, it seems never ending. And they're happening in some cases simultaneously. You talked to people at their breaking point, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of Californians are at their breaking point. I mean, you know, I don't need to tell anyone that we're in the middle of a pandemic. We have these horrific fires. We've had heat waves that have also knocked out power. You've had people dealing with smoke and terrible heat waves, and their power goes out, so they can't do anything about it. So, yeah, absolutely. I would say many Californians are at wit's end.
You know, I spoke, Thomas, to a friend of mine who's living not that far from you, and he said, you know, we fully accepted that this is our new normal, that this is every season it's going to be like this. And you closed out your piece that you wrote by talking to a climate scientist who said, people always asking me, is this new normal? And I always say, no, it's going to get worse. And as bad as it is, what they're going through, that's the reality, isn't it? They're forecasting that years 2021 and beyond, you're going to see a confluence of these things and longer fire seasons here and less wherewithal to make things better. There's got to be a real concern about, forget the long-term future, even the near future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the climate scientists tell us that even if we changed our behavior, if we drove less and took airplanes less, and even if we did modify carbon emissions, our behavior, then that would not improve the situation that we're seeing now. That might stabilize it, but stabilize it at this new normal. And of course, the likelihood of us being able to just pivot on a dime and stop emitting what we're emitting, it seems unlikely right now. So basically what climate scientists are saying is, you know, don't get used to this new normal because it's going to be worse than this in the years to come.
Well, Thomas Fuller, was a great piece. Opened at least my eyes up to what's going on there on the West Coast. I appreciate a few minutes, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We come back, everyone. A former Undersecretary of Defense, he'll join us to explain why he's supporting Joe Biden over President Trump. He'll explain why Lafayette Park was his breaking point.